Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, the series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die book. And today we are looking at ZZ Top's 1983 album, Eliminator. Eliminator was released underneath the Warner Brothers label, produced by Bill Ham, with art direction from Bob Alford and Tom Hunnicutt, nationality USA, and a running time of 45 minutes and 23 seconds. Now, truth be told, with Eliminator by ZZ Top, I went into this being pretty unenthusiastic about the overall style of ZZ Top. They're not really my vibe, not really my thing, and hard rock in general I find eventually tends to mesh together all too much. And I think ZZ Top has some of the most obvious qualities of hard rock that really, for me personally, kind of drag it down. And I feel like with this album, the first half of the album is definitely a good example of what I mean with that, whereas the second half is significantly better in my opinion. For example, you have the opening track, Gimme All Your Lovin', a pretty infamous song of ZZ Top that follows a lot of the common tropes of hard rock, with heavy guitar riffs, a steady drum beat carrying throughout the entire song, and songs about very simple topics like sex, and told in a very simple and uninteresting way for the most part. The one thing that is maybe a bit more outside of the realm is that ZZ Top this time around with Eliminator as a whole goes a more synthy route, where they introduce more synth effects into their sound. But even still, Gimme All Your Love feels like the most commercially friendly version of any song they could have possibly have done. It's not the worst song by any means, and it definitely remains a classic song for most people, but for me personally, it also manages to pull off just about every trope of hard rock and really feels like the most watered down version of it in a way. And with the second track, you get more of the same, but this time around it feels like it is very much a product of its time. It's not that memorable and really remains as a truly forgettable track overall. There's a couple of instrumental breaks in this song that manage to keep things a little bit fresh and a little bit more unique, but even still, this is very much your typical hard rock that you have come to know at this point. And if you played this song for me, I would just instantly recognize the fact that it came from the 80s or even the 70s, because a lot of this feels like it is even dated at the point in which it released in 1983. You also have one of ZZ Top's most infamous songs on the third track here, which is the song Sharp Dressed Man, a song that is very lyrically simple about how women like a well-dressed man, a sharp-dressed man. Pretty simple, pretty direct, but what does carry this song and make it a pretty well-known staple among most music fans is the riff throughout this entire thing. The guitar riffs really carry this track, and the instrumental breaks, the guitar solos, are also quite fantastic here. And even though this does still kind of fall in the realm of things that I don't personally enjoy, I definitely see the appeal of this song and feel like there is a reason as to why this one was so popular. If there's one song I love more than any other in the first half of this record, it is the fourth track, I Need You Tonight. And I think what really gravitates me to this one a bit more is that it's a bit slower. It doesn't really continue on with these heavy, continuous riffs like the previous tracks were, but instead it takes things a bit further back and goes a more laid-back approach. The lyrics are a bit more bloated this time around and a bit more detailed, and not relying on being as simplistic one-liners, and this time feel like a more intriguing and descriptive narrative. And over the course of its 6 minutes, it being much slower, it serves as a slow burn and instead develops a much richer, much more textured atmosphere in its runtime. The amazing guitar solo that comes in halfway through and at the end of the track is really one of my favorite guitar solos on this whole album. And on top of that, you also have the vocals that are a bit more different and a bit more hushed this time around. And I think these hushed vocals continue to add to the personality of this track and really make it stand out as a bit more of a unique blend of genres rather than the first three songs on this album, which feel very typical hard rock. But that being said, you get into the second half of this record, which in my opinion, like I said, is much better than the first half. You have the deep cut Legs, which is a longer, again, more slower track in a way, but this time I just love the overall tone and atmosphere that ZZ Top brings to the table here. It's incredibly groovy and infectious with its style and goes a bit more of a funk route, which really feels like ZZ Top going into a bit more of a bolder and more interesting direction. It doesn't feel like it is too generic like many of the other tracks on this album, and instead feels like a much more unique hidden gem in the rough. And on top of that, you have a fantastic performance. The vocals are great. Instrumentally, this thing is fantastic as well. The atmosphere is really great here too. And I feel like Legs overall is one of the much more interesting tracks that you're going to hear on Eliminator. If there was one song I would recommend, this might be it. And carrying on with this funk groovy aspect that I mentioned, you also have the 7th song, Thug, which pretty much tries to carry its entire self on this very funky and groovy, elasticy-like guitar sound effect that comes in and out of the entire song. This is clearly what ZZ Top was going for with this song. They very clearly had an idea and said, let's carry this with just the simplicity of this guitar. And it works. It really does manage to pull off what they were going to do here, because the whole song is really interesting and funky and groovy and infectious with just how simple this guitar manages to be, but it really is intriguing and interesting to the ear, at least to me personally. But not everything on the second half of this album is as good as these previous songs I have mentioned so far. You have the 10th song on here, If I Could Only Flag Her Down, which instrumentally, not bad. It is continuing on the standard of ZZ Top instrumentally and manages to carry itself from beginning to end on its instrumentals. But if there's one thing that is a little disappointing for me with this song that I noticed pretty quickly, was that the vocals feel like they are kind of poorly produced or just poorly mixed into the sound here. So much so that it really feels like the singer is not even part of the band in the studio. He feels like he is kind of pushed to the side and was layered on very poorly. It's not the best mixing for sure on this album. Might be one of the worst aspects of it is the production of this song is very wonky. It's really off and is off-putting to me. It's jarring just how much the vocals here feel like they don't really fit and mesh with the overall instrumentation being laid down. And part of me thought maybe this was intentional. Maybe it's trying to create a unique and interesting atmosphere. But if that's the case, sometimes something that is intentional doesn't necessarily work out. And honestly, I would say that for sure happens here. This is a song to me that just doesn't really work all that well because the mixing just feels really jarring to me. There are a few songs I didn't mention on here. For example, the song Dirty Dog, Bad Girl, TV Dinners is a bit more of a unique track. But for the most part, a lot of these songs that I haven't mentioned, I didn't mention because they're just more of the same. And I think that's my issue with ZZ Top, is they never feel that unique, that adventurous. They really just feel like the most typical aspects of hard rock really coming together and putting themselves out into the limelight. With a few really decent tracks on here, some really great songs that stand out, this whole album as an overall project is a bit disappointing to me because there isn't a whole lot going for it. And the soft rating of this album only came in at a 6.6 out of 10. So it didn't rank too high soft rating wise. And as for the hard rating, if I were to adjust it as an overall project, I would actually rank it even lower than that. I would give it a 6 out of 10 because, like I've said, this is to me pretty bland of an overall album. So it is pretty forgettable, pretty much a miss in my book. And honestly, with that all being said, it shouldn't come as too surprise that this is a NE for not essential. You don't need to listen to it before you die. You're really not missing out on much. And the hits that are on here, you have probably heard on the radio and you got the gist of this whole album. If there was one deep cut that I would recommend, it's the song Legs, for example, which I think does manage to stand on its own as a bit more of a unique detour in the ZZ Top album here. But anyways, that pretty much does it for this review. Let's go ahead and see what the next album we're going to listen to is in the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. Alright, random number generator 1 to 1001, generate. 736 is the next one we're listening to, which is 736 being Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream. So go listen to Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream, and I'll review that in exactly 1 week from now. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow along in listening to every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And my name is Randy Stratton, and I am signing off.